Hello everyone, welcome to Let's Code React Native Lesson 1. Today I'll be giving you guys a brief introduction of React Native and how to get started by building a really simple application using the built-in React Native generator. And as you guys know, if you are watching this video, you probably heard of React Native. You're probably wondering whether you should be learning this new technology. Um, it's the first question you're going to ask is what's React Native? Um, it's this question can be answered easy way or the hard way. The easy way is React Native is a framework that Facebook has built to allow developers to write cross-platform applications really easily. And there's also a hard answer, but we'll get to that later. And what can React Native do? Like, because I believe some of you are native developers. You already built numerous applications using Swift or Java for Android and iOS, and you wonder, like, does React Native have all the capabilities of these languages that I've been very used to? And is there a limitation? Are we just going to build really simple one-page or multi-page applications with it? Can we build something that's complex in logic and stuff like that? So here are a couple of examples that I took from internet, also including some of the libraries that I use when I was building React Native applications. Uh, you can build really complex UI and user interactions with React Native. It's not really limited by anything. React Native platform is very, very robust, and you could basically build anything with it. The only thing is if something is not originally supported by the native React Native platform, you have to go ahead and build a native module and bridge that to your application. But everything is possible. It just some is easy, some takes time to do. So you can see Material, React Native. This is a UI library that's for building Android applications. You can also see this the React Native Elements. I recommend that. It's very, very useful for people that started to learn React Native and want to see how everything put together, but not exactly really want to know what's really going on behind, or if they already have the knowledge of building React.js applications. So what is React Native for? A lot of people ask me, especially when I was building React Native, and my boss asked me why using React Native is just like what it says, is for building something that you learn once and then you write everywhere. Currently, it's just Android and iOS. There's also a library that supports React Native codes on OS X. So a lot more platforms will be supported later. It's for something that you want to learn how to build it, and then you can apply that exact same principle to all different platforms. Not necessarily it's not necessarily that you have to learn every platform specifics. Like there's only a couple platform specifics you have to know, but the difference is not much between iOS and Android. So what is React Native not for? A lot of people dislike React Native. A lot of people have questions or doubts about React Native platform, mainly because it's a running JavaScript. And believe it or not, JavaScript was horrible. Couple, 5 years ago, or 7 or 10 years ago, when it first came out. It's not as bad anymore. JavaScript has become really, really fast, and the internal optimizations of React Native really eliminated a lot of the issues that, especially in performance, with when you building it. So there's not much of a difference. And Native is not for someone who just want to write code once and then think it will work everywhere. For React Native, is not the case. For other platforms, it might be. For example, Ionic. React Natives, you have to really keep in mind that sometimes the code you write will not work on a different platform, especially Android, because some of the APIs that React Native expose are basically different based on the platforms. So it's really a learn once, write everywhere instead of write everywhere and run everywhere. So I mentioned Ionic framework before, and I have done quite a bit of development on Ionic framework. And what is the difference between React Native and Ionic? And I would like to show you this structure of an Ionic app. So as you see, this if when you have an Ionic app, it's basically you are using apart some of the UI elements that provided by Ionic framework, and these are just like when you're using any CSS or UI elements library. You're using those, and you're basically building a HTML page that runs Angular. And later, when you're building this application and when you're running it actually on the device, you are leveraging the Cordova platform that control this web view that runs your app, and then have bridges between the actual native APIs and whatever JavaScript API you're calling. So in a nutshell, basically you are running a web page inside a web view as an app instead of basically a fully native experience. So is React Native any different with React.js? I could say it's quite a bit, but not so much. Um, just recently, React Native has put out a big change that pulled the React library out. So instead of before you had to require React from React Native packages, you just need to import React from the React packages. So they're completely separate and reusable. And what's the difference? This diagram shows what happened when you are rendering something in React.js and compare with React Native. In React, for example, if you're rendering this that returns a div that shows hi, it first goes to the React.js, and then it has the virtual DOMs and everything, and they're rendering, and then put out to the browser DOM and render actual document. And in React Native, you have this view element that basically indicating I want to use a native view to wrap this. Actually, this code is invalid because you cannot have text hi just by itself. You have to wrap it with text. So, but let's not get into detail. So you have a view that tells React Native you want to render a view on the native platform, and then it has bridges between the React Native part and the actual uh, operating system. So for in the case of iOS, it will create a UI view, and for Android, it will create whatever the corresponding view for Android, and everything else works the same way. So when you actually inspect the app once it's rendered, instead of you are instead of like Ionic, you are getting a web page. You're actually getting a layered, well layout UI elements that's using the native UI elements, and that has many advantages. For example, you have the native interactions, UI UX experiences. You also have performance gains from that. So after I talk about all this about React Native and a little bit just about myself, so I'm a software engineer, I started using React Native since January 2016. I have built two React Native production applications that runs on both iOS and Android platform. And by doing that, I have learned a lot about React Native and about its best practices, how to problem shooting, troubleshooting, a lot of it. So I would like to share that with you guys through this Let's Code series. And also, I have my GitHub URLs, which you can go follow me because I start some interesting React Native related repos all the time. And okay, now let's code. For the tutorial, if you're using Windows and building for Android, you can just follow the instructions stated on the React Native website, which is very easy to follow. And let's get started. The first step you're going to do is to install dependencies. You will need Node.js, Watchman, and the React Native command line interface, and Xcode. Node.js is used by React Native to manage its dependencies, and later you'll be using Node.js npm utility to install other people's React Native modules. Watchman is used by Facebook to watch changes in the file system. It's highly recommended, and when you install it, it will give you a better performance when you're running the packager. React Native command line interface is used for building and creating React Native projects, and Xcode is for building the final product and running on the iOS emulators and then iOS devices. So you can just follow the commands here, brew install node if you're using Homebrew, and brew install Watchman. After you have installed Node and Watchman, you can go ahead and install React Native CLI, which can be done simply just using this command. And if you're getting a permission error, you can use sudo to elevate your privileges if you don't if you're receiving a permission error. And it's recommended that you are using some sort of Node version manager to install your Node.js. But that we will mention, I will make another video about that later. Finally, you have to install Xcode, which you can find in the Mac App Store. And installing Xcode will also install the iOS simulators. That's really important for you to build the iOS app and testing it. Okay, let's start building this React Native app. In your terminal, sorry, I have something running already. In your terminal, navigate to a folder that you want to store your React Native project and run this command, React Native init, and then the project name. For today, I'll be using let's code _1. After you press enter, React Native will install all the dependencies and generate a boilerplate project for you to start coding for React Native. I already have this initialized, so I will go ahead, cd into this folder. Let's open this project and see what's the file structure. Inside the Let's Code folder, you can see that React Native CLI has created a bunch of files for us. Tests is for the unit test, and for your components, it has been automatically generated using the Jest renderer. Oh no, the Jest test framework. But later, when I'm going to talk about testing, I'll be using Ava and Enzyme from Airbnb to do most of the testing, unit testing on React Native. I won't be using this, so I will just delete it. You have a folder called Android, and that's straightforward. Is your Android project folder. If you are familiar with Android project, you can easily recognize this as an Android project folder. Same for iOS. This is the Xcode project for the iOS project. And then you have a node modules folder, which stores all the dependencies that your project needs. And then you have a couple of hidden files. Babel, bug config, flow config, watchman config. These hidden files, you are not necessarily need to know how to modify them, but they are very crucial for your React Native project. So when you're copying over projects, make sure that you copy all those hidden files as well. Otherwise, it could create a bit of issue when you're running the project on a different machine. And then you can see the two files, index.android.js and index.ios.js. These are the project source code for your React Native application. Currently, we only have one file because this is going to be a very simple application. But some of you might want to ask, why the two files? Isn't React Native supposed to saving me time instead of having me to write separate files for for different platforms? Well, it's true, but the only reason that this is two files is you're going to need two files for any React Native code that you're going to write is if your code is going to use platform specific APIs, it's best to split them into different files. So it's not going to create runtime issues when your source code is running different platform. So for this, it means that if you are on the Android platform, your app is only going to load this index.android.js. If you're on iOS platform, your app is going to load this index.ios.js. One example is if you are building an app that required Apple Pay Force Touch capabilities, you are probably going to need to use two separate files for the same code. That one reference the native API for Apple Pay. The other does not for Android. So currently, these two files are identical because except the text, because both platforms the keyboard shortcuts are different. But everything else is the same. And this is what React Native source code typically looks like. You have the import statements that imports React Native and React. You have your class declaration that declares your component. You have the style sheet for styling your app or component. And this line is only used in index.ios or android.js. This line is crucial because it registers your current component with the native bridge, and it also gives the name. You do not need this line for any other files. You only need it for the entry point of your application, which in our case is index.ios.js and index.android.js. This name, let's code _1, must match whatever name you're specified in your native project, which you can see right here. The module name we have it's letscode_1. If these two do not match, your application cannot find the module that's going to be your application, and it will throw you an error. Okay, let's run this application and see how it looks. Let's press run. As you can see, this React Native packager automatically opens. If you already have the packager open, it will not load this window, but what's going on? Oops. Oh yeah, my computer is getting laggy with all the yeah, with all the screen capturing, and I keep pressing play, so it just keep restarting. Okay, so we have this application running, and it is a native application. You can inspect the UI hierarchy. As you can see, there's no web views anywhere. Everything is a native UI component. And this is a very nice little message. Welcoming you to React Native. Okay. This is our first video of Let's Code React Native. Later, I'll be uploading more videos building on top of this application. And if you have any suggestions, any requests, please let me know. If I have made any mistakes in the video, please leave a comment and let me know. I will correct my mistake in the next video. Until next time, see ya.